Governor Jared Polis, Senator John Hickenlooper, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So 10 years ago, you were Representative Polis representing this area in the U.S. House. You were Governor Hickenlooper at the time. Senator, when you think back on 10 years ago, is there a specific moment or memory that's still fresh in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much that happened so fast. And, you know, we had droughts and wildfires, and that first rain on Monday it rained a little bit, Tuesday it rained a little more, Wednesday it started raining. We were all so happy. And then the next thing you know, there's the worst flooding, the worst nightmare we could ever imagine. I just had a hip operation because my staff had promised me that September was the 1 month where there was never a disaster. So I was safe after all the shootings and wildfires we had. And sure enough, so the flood came. So I remember being in a helicopter and going over the rooftops of the houses and seeing people on the flat roofs of their homes stranded because the flood waters were still around them on Saturday and Sunday.
Governor, is there something that's still fresh in your mind as you think back to 10 years ago?
Well, yeah, you know what? I remember going up with John, who really rose to the occasion as governor, then Senator Cory Gardner, and our helicopter actually landed and picked up some survivors that were screaming for help. Basically, the highways had washed out, the roads had washed out. These people had been there, I think at that point, for about 3 days because you couldn't fly for the first couple of days because there was heavy rain. Finally, the rain stopped, and we combined recon with rescue missions, and I was focused on what I needed to do in Washington, and later on we wanted to do some work to prevent clawbacks of funds and make sure they're able to use all the funds. But the first priority for the first few days, just supporting the first responders and getting everybody out.
Yeah, getting people out of the canyons and so forth. Yep.
Can I have you scooch just a little over there? Yeah, that's perfect. All good. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Senator Hickenlooper, when you look at the recovery and the rebuilding effort, is there something that you think that we did particularly well in this instance? And in retrospect, is there anything that you think we should have done differently?
Well, you know, Governor Shumlin from Vermont had called me 2 days after the flood and just said, you know, we had the same thing 3 years ago. And the one thing, you can't go back and tell people you're going to build back what they had. You got to tell them you're going to build it back, but it's got to be better, or else they've lost too much. And so we built back better long before Joe Biden ever said it. Shumlin should get credit for that. We built back with a sense of resilience, and we kind of laid out a framework, but I've got to really give a tremendous credit to Governor Polis's team that came in and kept that priority that everything we're going to do is be getting ready for the next flood, because there's going to be one at some point. How do we build back in such a way that we're better prepared for the next wildfire, the next flood?
Is that truly possible, Governor, when you're looking at a situation like a 500-year flood? Have we built a more resilient floodplain and infrastructure, and can even the best preparations deal with an event like that again?
So what we've changed systemically in the governor's office, the state agencies, is rather than deal with each disaster separately, each one needs an appropriate response, is we up the bar on creating a general resiliency and disaster effort. So we have people that are focused on preparing for fire, flood, tornado, you name it, year-round, that are then able to jump when something occurs. There's more and more of these climate-related issues, whether it's going to be another flood or another bad fire year. 2020, which was my second year as governor, we had the 3 largest fires in the entire history of the state of Colorado, all in 1 year. So these floods were, you said 500-year floods, maybe now they're 50-year floods or 20-year floods. We don't know, but we need to be ready for what comes next and make sure we build back in a sensible way to reduce that risk going forward.
How do you have the conversation with folks about the impacts of climate change on these disasters without making it feel like you're taking something that unites the community and inserting a political issue or something where people feel divided sometimes?
I think you just have to focus on the science, and you know, the chances of this all being a coincidence with the largest fires, the biggest floods all over a few years. We've had drought for 9 of the last 10 years. You know, I think when you get to the solutions, there can be a vibrant political debate, and that's totally fine. But when you're talking about keeping people safe and make sure we're building in a sensible way, fire defense perimeters, a sensible way against floods, we need more water efficiency because of drought. The Colorado River has a lot less water than it used to. These are just simple facts. They're hard to argue. I think we need to focus on those real proactive solutions around how we can better prepare for the future.
Senator Hickenlooper, I'd like to hear from you on that same issue of how do we make the connection between worsening fires, worsening floods, the impact of climate on our day-to-day lives?
I don't think it's that big a question anymore. I don't think there are more than a dozen people in the Senate who disagree that climate change is causing these extreme weather events. And there is disagreement, as Governor Polis said. There's disagreement about what the solutions are, what should our priority be, where do we spend the money. But pretty much everybody recognizes the science. We've got so much historical data now on the evolution of our atmosphere and our water systems that, I mean, we've got 12,000 years of sedimentary records on the Colorado River that demonstrates this isn't just a drought. This is the worst not seasonal, but aridification evolution that we've ever seen in the 12,000 years. So people recognize it's real. And they might argue about how much of it's human caused or how much of it, we should use electric vehicles. Those are political discussions that we should have, and we need to bring everyone together. But we can't turn away from discussing that what used to be a 500-year flood might be happening every 20 years now.
Senator, the wireless emergency alert system, the WIA system, is something that we've spent a lot of time examining, and I don't think that there's anybody that would tell you that the system works really well. Right now, as it's set up, the federal government is essentially relying on the voluntary cooperation of cell phone providers to make that system work. Do you see a better way to go at that?
Well, certainly the status quo will not suffice, and clearly letting the voluntary activities of the cell carriers bear responsibility also is not going to suffice. So we've got $65 billion that we put into the bipartisan infrastructure bill that's going to make sure that we get rid of all the blind spots. But I also agree that we've got to set a higher standard and hold the carriers responsible. These are our emergencies where 5 minutes or 10 minutes, when you're talking about a flash flood, and you go back to the Big Thompson flood of 1976, where they had in 3 hours, they had a year's worth of rain, and 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You're talking life and death in those minutes.
Governor, if we could wrap up with a look ahead to what you think might be done to better, not disaster-proof the state, but to build that resilience, to reduce some of the risk. There are lots of great ideas out there that cost a lot of money. What is it that you wish that we had the ability to do, but simply don't have the funding for, or would require the cooperation of private landowners? What's on the wish list to make this a more resilient state when it comes to fires and floods? First,
this is the 10-year anniversary. I think it's time to sort of take a breath here and celebrate that we're Colorado strong. You remember all the merch that came out at the time and the difficulties people had. I experienced this flood personally. My father-in-law's basement, my parents' road to my parents' home. I mean, many of us in northern Colorado have personal stories. We didn't lose everything we had, but we lost everything we stored in our basement, including my husband Marlon's childhood memories and yearbooks and everything like that. But let's take a breath and say, look, we're Colorado strong, we're back, we're here. Now you ask a good question. What do we do going forward? First of all, thoughtful about where we build and how we build, right? Looking at the wildland-urban interface. In our state, floods are a risk, fires are an even bigger risk. And so we want to make sure we're thoughtful about building defense perimeters around areas where people live. And so we've employed the Youth Conservation Corps through AmeriCorps, so that's partially federally funded, state administered. We're active in taking down what they call fuel, but that basically means trees and bushes in and around where homes are. We're looking at building codes in the wildland-urban interface. We're looking at how we can engage with private landowners to say, look, this is work that your local fire district with support from the state can do for free at no cost to you to take down trees near your home. So these are the kinds of things we're doing. There's insurance reforms that are happening, some of that because of the Marshall Fire, some of that because of the floods here in Lyons in northern Colorado, to be more friendly to homeowners that have been damaged or lost everything they have. So I think we've taken that learning very seriously. Some of it's translated into action that's already reached my desk, and there's more work ahead. Governor Polis, Senator Hickenlooper, thank you both for your time. Appreciate it.
You bet.